The sound of handcuffs echoed through the courtroom, and in that instant, Judge Camille Monroe froze. "Hey, everyone. I hope you and your loved ones are safe, surrounded by peace, and walking in truth. Because today's story isn't just another courtroom case. It's about memory, it's about justice, and it's about what happened when the past walks through the door in chains." Camille's gavel had barely cooled from the last verdict when the next case was called. She flipped through the file with the smooth confidence of a woman who'd done this for years, reviewed charges, assessed evidence, ruled on fate. To her, it was routine now, just another name on a list, another life tangled up in the law, until the name stopped her cold. The state of Louisiana versus Darius King. Her hand stiffened. The name echoed in her chest like a heartbeat skipping a step. It was probably just a coincidence, she told herself. There were plenty of Darius Kings in the world, right? She steadied her breath, nodded to the bailiff, and the courtroom doors opened. Then he walked in. His shackled steps clinked against the polished floor. His orange jumpsuit hung heavy on his frame. His face was older, rougher, marked by hardship. But those eyes, Camille's breath caught. Those eyes were burned into her childhood. It was him, Darius King, the boy who'd once been her world, her best friend, her secret protector in a divided, judgmental town, her laughter in the dark, her dare-you-to-dream partner on endless summer afternoons. And now, he stood before her in chains, a defendant, accused of assault and robbery, facing years in prison. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Years collapsed between them like old walls. But this man, this weary, hardened man, wasn't the boy she remembered. The vibrant energy was gone. The hopeful fire dimmed. His shoulders sagged with the weight of too many battles fought alone. Camille gripped the bench in front of her. Her robe suddenly felt unbearably heavy. She had sworn an oath to be impartial, to rule by law, not by emotion. But how do you silence your heart when it's breaking open? She wanted to ask out loud, "What happened to you, Darius?" But the courtroom had already begun to buzz around her. Papers shuffled, reporters scribbled, lawyers adjusted microphones. And somewhere in that chaos, memories began clawing their way back. Memories of a small southern town, of two children from different worlds, one black, one white, who dared to be friends when no one else dared to cross that line. Their bond had started by accident at a creek on the edge of town. She had wandered too far and found him there, wrestling with a fishing line tangled in the reeds. She helped. He smiled. That's all it took. The creek became their hideaway, their rebellion. They talked about stars, built dreams bigger than Hammond, Louisiana, and swore they'd make it out together. She remembered one night, lying on their backs watching the stars. "You think it's possible?" she had asked, voice just a whisper. "Anything's possible," Darius said, "if you want it bad enough." Camille used to believe him, but the world had other plans. The summer evening had started just like 100 others before it. Camille Monroe and Darius King sat shoulder to shoulder on the porch steps of her family's home, watching the sun melt into the horizon. The fading light painted the sky in streaks of orange and lavender. Their laughter mingled with the low hum of crickets. It was one of those moments that felt timeless, safe. For them, the porch had always been their in-between space, not quite his side of town, not quite hers. A fragile sanctuary that somehow belonged to them both. Darius had just said something that made Camille laugh, really laugh, when the screen door creaked behind them. And then came the sound Camille would never forget. The heavy thud of her father's boots against the wooden floorboards. The laughter died instantly. Her father's shadow loomed behind them before he even spoke. "Camille." His voice was sharp, clipped, like it had been waiting to strike. "Get in the house now." Camille turned, confusion in her eyes. But Dad, we were just... No buts. His tone left no room for interpretation. It was final. From this day forward, you are not to see him again. Do you understand me? The words hit like a punch to the gut. Camille froze. Her heart thudded in her chest. She turned slowly to look at Darius, hoping for... She didn't even know what. A sign? A way out? But what she saw broke her. Darius was already bracing for it. His face had gone still, eyes down, shoulders tight. He gave her a small, sad smile, one that tried to say, "It's okay," even when it wasn't. "Go on," he said, voice soft but firm. "I'll be fine." But they both knew that wasn't true. Camille's chest felt like it was caving in. Her legs wouldn't move. The porch, once their place of laughter and light, now felt like a battlefield. And she was being pulled in two directions, the man who raised her and the boy who held her heart. Her father stood waiting. Finally, she stood. Her steps were slow, heavy, each one a betrayal. As she reached the door, she turned back one last time. Darius was still sitting on the steps, bathed in the amber light of the dying sun, his hands clasped tightly together, his head bowed, his silhouette small against the vastness of the empty street. He didn't look back at her, but Camille could feel the silence between them swell with everything they weren't allowed to say. The screen door shut behind her with a final thud, a sound that echoed in her chest for years. That was the last time they truly saw each other. And though time moved on, college, law school, life in a city far from Hammond, that moment never left Camille. It haunted her in quiet corners of her mind. That porch, that silence, that goodbye. She never stopped wondering what happened to him after that. Did he leave town? Did he chase the dreams they once spoke about under the stars? Or did the weight of that broken night and 1,000 more like it pull him under? Years passed. Camille threw herself into her studies. Law school became a mission, a way to climb higher, run further, build a life so far away from Hammond it couldn't find her. And Darius, she didn't know. He became a question she never dared to ask aloud. Until now, until the moment he walked into her courtroom in handcuffs. And suddenly, all those unanswered questions, all those buried memories, came rushing back with a force that left her breathless. She looked at him now, the man, the stranger, the defendant, and she realized something she didn't want to admit. She had left him behind, and maybe, just maybe, the world had done the rest. The courtroom had settled into an uneasy stillness. Only the soft rustling of papers, the quiet hum of fluorescent lights, and the occasional shuffle of shoes broke the silence. Judge Camille Monroe sat still as stone on the bench, but her mind was anything but quiet. Across from her, Darius King sat at the defense table, shackled and still. His posture was slouched, his hands clasped tight in front of him, as if trying to hold himself together. He hadn't looked at her since that first glance when he walked in, but she could feel his presence like heat, like gravity. This wasn't just another defendant. This was him, her childhood, her wound, her guilt. She forced her eyes back to the file in front of her, the charges: assault, robbery, resisting arrest. The prosecution was confident, polished, the kind of man who used authority like a weapon. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and faced the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice cutting clean through the air, "Darius King is accused of attacking a convenience store clerk and stealing money from the register. The evidence is clear. We have surveillance footage and eyewitness testimony. We will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. King is guilty." Camille's fingers tightened around the gavel in her lap. She had read the file. She knew the evidence wasn't strong. The surveillance footage was grainy at best, the figure a dark blur, moving quickly through a dimly lit store. The witness testimony, inconsistent. The clerk had described a man in a red hoodie, but couldn't recall any defining features, not even the man's face. And no red hoodie had been found, not on Darius, not anywhere near the scene. Still, the prosecutor pressed forward with conviction. His job wasn't to prove the truth, it was to win. Camille could feel the old anger rising, the kind that started back in law school when she saw how easily assumptions could become verdicts. And now, it was playing out right in front of her. She stole a glance at Darius. His eyes were cast downward, his expression unreadable, but the tension in his jaw, the rigid stillness of his body, it all told her what he wasn't saying. He was bracing for it, because he'd been through this before. His record wasn't long, but it was enough. A petty theft charge, loitering, disorderly conduct, small things, old things. But together they painted a picture, one that the jury would see before they ever truly saw him. And that was the real danger. Camille had spent her career telling herself that justice was about facts. But now, sitting on the bench, she couldn't ignore the quiet truth gnawing at her chest. Sometimes facts weren't enough to fight perception. The defense rose. Alicia Bennett, Darius's attorney, adjusted her glasses and stepped toward the jury with a calm strength that immediately shifted the room. "This case hinges on evidence," she said, her voice steady, or more accurately, the lack of it. She gestured to the video playing on the screen again. A figure darted across the grainy frame. No face, no details. "This," Alicia continued, "is what the prosecution wants you to trust. But what do you see? Be honest with yourselves. What do you really see?" The jury stared. A blur, a shape, a person maybe. But who? "You don't see a face," Alicia said. "You don't see identifying features, you see movement. That's all. That's not evidence, that's a guess." She let the silence hang before moving on. "And what about the red hoodie?" she asked. "The one the witness swore they saw?" She turned toward the jury, her voice sharpening. "It was never found. Not at the scene, not on Mr. King. Not anywhere. Why? Because it doesn't exist." A low murmur rippled through the spectators. The judge, Camille, banged her gavel softly, out of obligation more than will. Alicia didn't flinch. She kept going. "And the witness?" She paused, made eye contact with each juror. They admitted, under oath, that they never saw the suspect's face clearly. They said it was dark. They said they were frightened. That they assumed. Assumed. Camille closed her eyes for a half second. That word felt heavy. Assumption was the slow poison of the courtroom. It looked like truth, sounded like certainty, but killed everything it touched. Alicia's tone softened. "Now, imagine for a moment that you're Darius King. You're walking home. You're minding your business. And suddenly, you're stopped. Accused. Arrested." She turned slightly to look at Darius, then back at the jury. No one listens. No one checks the facts. No one looks for another suspect, because to them, you look like someone who could have done it. She let those words settle, then sat down beside her client, her back straight, her voice gone quiet. But her message thundered. Camille looked down from the bench. Her chest was tight, her throat dry. Alicia hadn't just delivered a defense. She had given voice to everything Camille had buried for years. And then Darius stood. The courtroom held its breath as Darius King rose from his seat. The faint clink of the chain around his ankles echoed in the silence, a haunting reminder of the weight he carried, not just physically, but in every room he entered, in every gaze he endured, in every assumption ever made about him. He stood tall, but heavy, not with defiance, with truth. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, not weak, but controlled. like every word had been held in for too long. "I'm not perfect," he began. "I've made mistakes. I've trusted the wrong people. I've taken wrong turns." He paused, letting the room feel that. "But this," his voice grew stronger, "this is not one of them." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Camille Monroe, from her seat on the bench, felt her heart clench. That voice, it was older now, more worn, but it was still his voice, still that fire she remembered. Darius turned his eyes slowly toward the jury, scanning the faces of the people who would decide his fate. "The truth is, they don't see me." His tone was firm now, sharp with pain. "They see my record. They see my skin. They see every bad headline they've ever read. But they don't see me, the man who was just trying to go home that night." A few jurors shifted in their seats. One crossed her arms tighter. Another looked down at his hands. Darius pressed on. "They've already decided who I am. To them, I'm not a person. I'm a profile, a warning sign, a suspect." His voice cracked slightly, but he kept going. "I'm tired of being defined by what people assume. Tired of paying again and again for mistakes I've already paid for. I'm tired of a world where being innocent isn't enough, not when your face makes people afraid before you even speak." A hushed murmur rolled through the courtroom. The judge's gavel tapped lightly, but no one really cared. Darius looked down for a moment, breathing deep, grounding himself. Then he looked back up, not just at the jury this time, but at Camille. Their eyes locked. He didn't blink. "I just want to be seen," he said, and this time his voice was barely above a whisper. "Not for my past, not for my mistakes, but for who I am, standing here right now." And then he sat down. No rustle of papers, no whisper from the crowd, just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't ask questions. It listens. Camille sat frozen on the bench. Her fingers gripped the wood in front of her like it was the only thing anchoring her to the moment. Her mind was racing, her heart was split, because the man who just spoke wasn't a stranger, and what he said wasn't unfamiliar. It was the same dreamer who once whispered to her, under starlight, "Anything's possible if you believe it enough." But life hadn't been kind to Darius, and now he was here, asking not for sympathy, but for recognition. Camille knew this wasn't just about evidence anymore. It was about perception, about history, about the system she had sworn to serve, and how it had failed him. And the question lingered in the air. Was this trial about the truth, or about the assumptions that had always shaped the system? The courtroom began to empty, but Judge Camille Monroe didn't move. She sat there, still in her black robe, gavel resting silently on the bench, her eyes fixed not on the people shuffling out, but on the place where Darius King had stood, where he had spoken, where he had poured out the truth not just about the case, but about everything the system refused to see. Across the room, Darius was now standing by the clerk's table, signing his release papers. The shackles were gone, but the weight he carried, that was still there, hanging in the slope of his shoulders, the tightness of his jaw. Camille watched him, watched the boy who once believed anything was possible, now walking like a man who had spent years being told the opposite. He finished signing, turned to leave, but then he stopped. His footsteps paused, his head turned, and his eyes found hers. There was a silence that stretched between them, a silence full of years, of things unsaid, of memories that refused to stay buried. And then he spoke. "You always believed in justice," he said. His voice was steady, but laced with pain. "But justice has never belonged to people like me." The words landed like a blow. Camille's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to answer, to respond, but what could she say to that? What words could erase what he'd been through? Still, she tried. Her voice faltered. She cleared her throat. I was wrong. Her voice cracked, but she didn't hide it. I see that now. I've been blind to so much, and I can't change the past. But I won't let this happen again, not to anyone else. It wasn't polished, it wasn't eloquent, but it was the only truth she had. Darius looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since the trial began, and for a second, just a second, something softened behind his eyes. A flicker, maybe forgiveness, maybe just understanding. Good, he said quietly. Make sure you don't. Then he turned and walked through the doors of the courthouse. Camille sat back in her chair, the courtroom now empty. The sound of the doors swinging shut behind him echoed through the space and through her chest. And in that moment, everything she thought she knew about her job, her robe, her oath, felt different. Justice had failed Darius, but it didn't have to keep failing the next one. She remained seated for a long time after he left, staring into the quiet room, her hands on the bench, her thoughts a storm. The wood beneath her palms used to symbolize power, law, fairness. Now it felt cold, hollow. Because the truth was this: she'd spent her career believing the law was enough, that if you just followed the rules, the outcome would be fair. But the truth, the rules didn't treat everyone the same, and sometimes following the rules still meant letting someone fall through the cracks. Darius had made her see what she didn't want to admit, that the justice she upheld wasn't neutral, it wasn't blind, it was flawed, and it was hers to challenge, to change, to make better. She looked out over the empty courtroom and whispered to herself, justice isn't about cold rules. It's about responsibility, about courage, about doing what's right, even when it's hard. It wasn't a closing argument. It wasn't a ruling. It was a promise to Darius, to herself, to everyone who would ever sit in that courtroom again. Later that week, as she gave a speech at a local law school, Camille closed her remarks not with a quote from a Supreme Court ruling, but with something far more personal. Justice, she said, isn't found in law books, or gavels, or titles. It's found in the choices we make, the silences we break, the systems we dare to question. And sometimes justice begins when we finally choose to see what we've been trying to ignore. So, was justice served that day? Maybe. But what mattered more is this: Camille Monroe saw the truth, and she chose not to look away. If this story made you feel something, don't keep it to yourself. Drop a comment. Have you ever witnessed justice fail someone? Have you ever felt unseen? And if you believe stories like this matter, stories about truth, reckoning, and the power of seeing each other fully, then please subscribe to our channel, Black Women. Let's keep telling the stories that the system tries to silence. Together, we can make justice louder than judgment.